campaign on the Bodhisattva path. I have written the 37 practices of Bodhisattvas, following what has been said by the excellent ones on the meaning, sutras, tantras, and treatises. Though not poetically pleasing to scholars, owing to my poor intelligence and lack of learning, I've relied on the sutras and the words of the excellent, so I think these Bodhisattva practices are without error. However, as the great deeds of Bodhisattvas are hard to fathom for one of our poor intelligence, I beg the excellent to forgive all faults, such as contradictions, non sequiturs. Through the virtue from this may all living beings, the ultimate and conventional altruistic intention, and thereby become like the protector Chenrezig, who dwells in neither extreme, not in the world nor in peace. Anyone who doesn't have one of these little blue books, please feel free to take one as White Lotus's gift to you. This text is from the 1300s. The writer is a Tibetan monk who, this is one of the texts that all the full range of Buddhist traditions in Tibet uphold as a great text. They all use it. However, it happens to be actually in our direct lineage too, which is kind of nice. But Garchen Rinpoche has said that it's the crystallization of the greatest work on conduct that came out of India. Shantideva is entering the Bodhisattva path, the Bodhicharyavatara. Dalai Lama has said that's his favorite book. So this is like the essence of the Dalai Lama's favorite book. And so it has the advantage of being very brief, with, a minimal amount of technical words, but that's all right. If you come across a word you don't know, it's good to explore it, find out what the meanings actually are. Because, Sanskrit, the ancient language of India, is not the language that the Buddha spoke, but it's very closely related, they believe. And it has great precision in terms of the concepts here, in having you train your own mind and understand sort of the tricks of the mind and the benefits of the mind, how to use it. Tibetan has the advantage that the liturgical Tibetan language was consciously created directly off of Sanskrit. The Tibetans did not have a written language, and they didn't have any Buddha Dharma at all. They were like a warlike people that had conquered Central Asia, including the capital of China. Buddhism came to Tibet, it's said in this statue that is still in Lhasa, the capital of Tibet. This statue was brought to Tibet by the daughter of a Chinese emperor. Tibet had done very well in a war, and part of the peace treaty was the Tibetan emperor got to marry the daughter of the Chinese emperor. You know how these things go. My neighborhood's like this too. And she was a Buddhist, so she insisted that she had to bring her Buddha statue with her, which she did. The minister, the Tibetan prime minister, so to speak, the representative of the emperor, was the minister Gar. So our teacher, Garchen Rinpoche, is considered to be a rebirth of that man. And he was the one that went to China and escorted the princess, soon to be the empress, back to Tibet with her statue. So the Tibetans got themselves civilized, they believed, having a written language. Obviously, if you don't have a written language, it doesn't mean that you're not intelligent. It was just everything was oral tradition. But for whatever reason, they decided from the top on down that we're going to be Buddhists now. And they sent their best and brightest across the Himalayas for the period of several hundred years, 300, 400 years, to learn the Sanskrit language. And they created the Tibetan language, written language, and they transmitted the full range of Buddhist teachings as they existed in India 1,500 years after the Buddha passed away. So this was the peak of Buddhist culture in India. Since then, it's declined greatly, almost disappeared, really. So what's special about what's called Tibetan Buddhism, it's really a misnomer, because Buddhism is just Buddhism. Sure, there's certain, cultural flavors and in different traditions as they've been maintained. But what's so fascinating about it is that you can go to a completely different culture. And like Gretchen and I went to Japan, for instance, and it's just remarkable. It's the same thing. Although it was separated historically by centuries, the Buddhists have done a tremendous job of keeping the understanding and the teachings uncorrupted. I mean, everything gets corrupted to one point or another for sure, but yet this is a remarkable, remarkable human achievement. In America, we can't keep things going straight for a generation. They go all over the place. What was A then becomes B. What was B now becomes A. People's loyalties change. Their philosophies change. Everything's going to change all the time. So how do you keep something going for 2,600 years without it being corrupted for fame and gain? Truly a remarkable accomplishment. So what's happy for us in what's called Tibetan Buddhism is that the full range of Buddhist teachings were transmitted from ancient India to Tibet. In some other cultures, not the full range went, but a very, like charismatic teacher, very deeply enlightened monk or nun would go to that culture, and somehow out of that, there'd be part of the tradition. But that's not a sectarian statement, because all of these teachings lead to the realization of yourself as having Buddha nature. It says in the Kalachakra Tantra, the 8 different traditions within Tibet, one is called Kalachakra. It means the wheel of time. And the idea that this very existence of time and space is a tremendous machine which we can use to generate our own eternal happiness, you might say. So in the Kalachakra Tantra, it says that all beings are Buddhas. Apart from this, there are no Buddhas. It's so mind-boggling. Here we are now with 8 billion people? Everybody thinking they're just separate from everybody else in an existential way, and, wanting more, fearing more, in competition, all these things going on. And we can't just pretend to do it differently. I can't pretend that I love everybody. I have to train my mind to do that. And it's only with full realization that that is actually true. So it's good to have these, beliefs that are helpful in going in the right direction, so to speak. But at the same time, what we need is this overarching view of the vastness of it. So the teachings of the Buddha have been divided by a great figure in India, like in the 4th century, between conventional teachings and absolute teachings. And everyone is kind of interested, spiritual seekers interested in the absolute teachings, because they are completely liberating, and to know that there's this kind of liberation, is very helpful as far as building one's confidence. But Nagarjuna said that the conventional teachings, in a sense, are more important than the absolute teachings, because it's by the conventional that you come to realize the absolute, and it's all about realization. This is the great gift that the Buddha gave to the world, this teaching on realization. It's not enough to say the right words, but we have to recognize, discover who and what we truly are, and then you can truly benefit people, and that is your liberation also. So we owe a great deal of debt to the Tibetans because they have this full range of the teachings. The benefit of that, or the importance of that, is that if there's a particular Buddhist teaching that doesn't seem to work with you, you have some sort of connection to the Buddha for whatever reason, no reason, you feel it, some sort of admiration, some sort of confidence that he wasn't insane, he wasn't drunk, he wasn't doing a big lie, he was sincere, all these things. You've come across the Buddha's teachings, which are exceptionally rare. And so there's some degree of confidence. You can have a particular teaching that just doesn't seem to be working for you or just doesn't resonate with you. And yet, a Tibetan Lama can say, well, here, then do this teaching. He or she has many, many different arrows in their quiver, so to speak. So there's a great skillfulness. And what that means is that nobody has to fit themselves into some preordained spiritual box. Here, cram yourself into this and then you'll be happy. It's not like that. Each one of us is unique. No one, except maybe a realized person, knows your path. And so it's this exploration. It's walking on the path. What is great about it is that you can come to experience that you really have discovered the path. And then the confidence becomes indestructible. So we're very, very fortunate because even with the tragedy that the Tibetans have experienced in the previous century, the 1950s, 1950 on, especially 1959, where they were, brutally suppressed, conquered by a foreign power who pretended that their culture was just like worthless and tried to snuff it all out. It's unbelievable. It's the largest area that's been colonized since World War II. You don't even hear about it anymore. It's really amazing. But nonetheless, that's been what they went through. Our own teacher, Garma Rinpoche, 20 years in a labor camp. How do you do that? But in that labor camp, he met one of the great saints of modern Tibet, Khenpo Munsel. Khenpo means one who knows. It's a title. But Munsel means dispeller of gloom. And isn't that what we all want? So he was a great teacher, teaching the great perfection, great completion, called Dzogchen in Tibetan. And Garma Rinpoche converted his 20 years then into a secret mental retreat because he couldn't do all the outer things. You couldn't do prostrations. You're in a concentration camp. And yet, it's just remarkable. You've never met a happier man. You see video of him. He'll be in a retreat and he walks in. He's old, and so he'll have someone assist him walking in, sitting down, and he's just clowning around all the time. You'd have no idea what he's been through in his life. But the thing is that it's sincere. And why is it sincere? Because he's seen that all this suffering is just like waves on the ocean. But he's experienced the Marianas Trench, the depth, the stability, the fact that these waves are really nothing. But for us, in our current view, our current attitude, our current assumptions of who and what we are, these waves are huge. So we have many, many teachings, and we have the exceptionally fortunate situation that we have inspiring people who can teach those things to us. And that's a great thing. You can have, I talked about having some sort of rapport with a particular teaching of the Buddha, or something doesn't work, try something else. It's all open for that experimentation. It's a vast educational structure, really, with tremendous support within it. That's what people don't necessarily understand. It's not just some individual journey. There's just all sorts of support that you don't know. In the Lotus Sutra, it says that bodhisattvas will spring up out of the earth to help you. It's so hard to believe this because we live in this space where, we have to manipulate reality in order to get the little crumbs that we're hoping for. But, Gretchen and I were talking yesterday, and I hadn't really thought about it this way. But, my teachers arose without me looking for them. There was hunger, there was aspiration, but they both, showed up invited by other people. And with Garma Rinpoche, I was the only one on our board of directors who didn't want him to come. Because, we're doing something else. We've got this big event happening. We've never been able to afford a translator. We got to get a translator for this guy. We just can't do it, So full of all the right reasons, right, Mr. Practical? It shows you how obscured we are. Because I have no doubt, my connection with this man. but I couldn't see it. Ignorance is just simply ignoring our true nature and the messages from our true nature. Ignorance is not stupidity. You can have the most brilliant people in the world who are ignorant. In Sanskrit, the word for ignorance is avidya. And that prefix, it means like atheistic, capello, agnostic, that without. Without what? Without vidya, avidya. Vidya is video, without seeing. That's what it is. We just didn't see. It's like when you have a car accident, and I just didn't see. I was looking the wrong way. So that's our situation. We're actually in a state, but this ignorance is the most powerful force in the universe, except for awareness. But in terms of a worldly way, ignorance is tremendously destructive. One of the great teachers, Aryadeva, who lived at the time of the original reincarnation of Gar Rinpoche, said, in the beginning, one reverses non-virtue. In the middle, one reverses the view of a self. And in the end, one reverses all views. Those who know this way are wise. This expresses the range of Buddha's teachings. First is self-liberation. We are looking to see who and what we are. We're always acting with these assumptions. Like they said, our eyes are always looking out. We never look in. When we start to look in, we discover all sorts of things about ourselves. And we can go on this search for finding out who and what we truly are. Isn't that a good thing to know? I mean, the world is full of us just making all these statements, but no one knows where it's coming from, so to speak. People say, this is my truth. Well, who's the my? Have you ever found that I? Look for it. So this is the first step. The first great career is the path of self-liberation. In Tibetan and Sanskrit, it's called, we translate it as renunciation, but that's, that word has baggage, because again, English isn't like Sanskrit and Tibetan. It's not precise for these kinds of concepts. In Tibetan and Sanskrit, the meaning is emerging from the swamp. It's totally positive. Renunciation is like negative. I'm saying no to stuff. Basically, if you're like me, you're saying no to everything you think you want. This is like, I'm not going to do that. Lavatarjan once gave a talk in Los Angeles, and he was talking about the suffering nature of unenlightened existence. That even our happiness is subject to impermanence, so there's even anxiety there. I might lose it. And he gave this talk about, sort of the fruits of this kind of non-virtuous action, the suffering that comes from that we have actually created for ourselves, even though we don't know it. And afterwards, one of his new students came up to him and said, I didn't like that at all. I don't want to hear about this stuff. I came here to be happy. But like a doctor, you have to diagnose. You have to see it for what it is. If you see the cause, you can remove the cause. If you know the cause of the happiness, you can practice the cause. Very practical. So this first great step of self-liberation, one reverses non-virtue. Dalai Lama says the essence of Buddhism is not to harm. That's the fundamental thing. And out of that basis, with that in mind, then we look at ourselves, we can discover how we actually exist. So this is a tremendous advantage, because now you're no longer acting out of just our own assumptions, but you're acting out of experience. Hindus and Buddhism are distinct in that way, that they believe that the knowledge that comes, the objective, you might say, the knowledge that comes from looking within is valid. I mean, there are all sorts of mistakes that can be made there too, don't get me wrong. It's not like that. It's critical, it's discriminatory. Is this valid? Is this valid? Whatever. But it's through this inner process that we come to see who and what we are. And then, as Aryadeva says, in the beginning, one reverses non-virtue. So by not engaging in non-virtue, we're not creating negative karma anymore. We're still getting the results of past actions, of course, but we can have the confidence, which is great. We know what's right. In the middle, one reverses the view of a self. So we can start, with this just simply non-virtue by studying and having some conviction that what is listed as non-virtues are non-virtues, and we delve into that. But then we move, as I already indicated, to this investigation of the self. And in the end, we reverse the view of the self. And what's the view that we have? Well, we have an alienated view. We have this kind of tuning fork in our heart that's always vibrating. It's called, the Buddhists call it dukkha, dissatisfaction, suffering even. The whole range of, we're just not really stable there. There's always some threat to this self because we haven't looked at the self. When we look, there's nothing there that can be harmed. I mean, that's mind-boggling. That's a very, very deep insight. But the farther we go, our confidence builds. In Buddhism, the word for faith is shraddha, and it has a different connotation than in the theistic religions. In theistic religions, you have to believe something that maybe, you can't really. You can have faith, but for the Buddhist, you can actually discover, and it's confidence. It's a different thing. It's like, you're taking teachings from a great car mechanic. You have some reason to believe this guy knows what he's talking about. And so you take a step in tuning your own car. You learn from your mistakes, but you're on the path. You're going in the right direction. It's no longer just random, throwing wrenches around or something. In the end, one reverses all views. The truth, our true nature, is non-conceptual. This is a tough one because at a certain stage, we need these concepts. They're getting us, but like they say, the point of concepts is to get beyond concepts. The example the Tibetans use, apparently the way that they would get water, have water in your ear, they get water out of the ear by pouring some water in the ear. So you use concepts to get beyond concepts. And what are the concepts? Well, vast love and compassion. Love meaning wanting others to be happy, compassion meaning wanting others to be completely free of suffering. But of course, in this vastness of human beings and all beings, sentient beings, that includes us. If beings are getting if we're wanting beings to be free from suffering, that includes us. But oddly, we get there by not looking and sort of enthroning ourselves, but rather you work for others. Naturally, you're freeing yourself. It's just the nature of things. So, this view, this non-conceptual view, is the highest view. And this is what Garwin Rinpoche was practicing for 20 years. And I can just simply say, just even hearing these teachings is liberating because the world is not completely dark anymore. You see just a little glimmer, a light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. As you practice these conventional teachings, what you're doing without knowing it is that your mind is abiding in that little dot of light. And by doing that, the light gets brighter and brighter and bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's a process that we don't have to make work. It's just a reflection in our own deluded way, our own dualistic way. It's just the natural reflection of how our true nature appears to us. And so we don't have to make it work. It already does work. We just have to keep doing it. And where the doubts come up, doubts are not bad, but we face the doubts directly. This is the great power of meditation. You're meditating, and I'm going to sit here and be without thought, right? And then I'm thinking it's going pretty smoothly, and I'm thinking, boy, I'm really thoughtless. But of course, then you realize that's a thought. You're screwed. Again and again and again, we fall. It's so good, though, because you're seeing how things really are. You try to, in the highest teachings, like the Vajrayana, you try to visualize yourself as a Buddha, and you see, oh my goodness, I'm still looking around, and there's my wife, she's gesturing at me. I don't see a bodhisattva, I see my wife. You fall again and again and again and again. but from this confidence in the highest view. And of course, that comes there's so much support when you have the dealings like we do with great teachers. It's easier to have some confidence and keep going. Nothing happens without this kind of faith and confidence. People can't learn to read except for the fact that they have confidence in somebody that's telling them, hey, good to learn this. Their teachers, their parents, sisters and brothers, whatever. It's a very natural process. There's nothing unnatural here. The quote from a modern Lama, Dzongsa Khyentse, the Vajrayana. So I should say, first of all, in those three things that I just elucidated, reversing non-virtue, reversing the view of a self, and then reversing all views. These also correspond to what are called the self-liberation path, the conventional. So reversing the view of a self is what the Dalai Lama teaches publicly. These are the conventional teachings of what's called the Mahayana. Yana is a path, Maha great. The Mahayana, the great path. Why a great path? Because it leads even beyond self-liberation and freedom and happiness. It leads all the way to Buddhahood. So there's a conventional Buddhahood, a path of Buddhahood to Buddhahood, Mahayana, and then an unconventional. The unconventional is called the Vajrayana. And so this corresponds to reverses all views. And so Dzongsa Khyentse is saying the Vajrayana is a path of the union of wisdom and method, the union of science and faith, the union of myth and truth. But many materialists, those whose sights are not yet set beyond this life, don't see the non-duality of these dualities. They may be awed by the vastness and depth of the theory of non-duality, but they disregard faith and devotion, even though faith and devotion are the vehicles that effectively deliver you to non-duality. They can accept the logic of truth, but then snobbishly dismiss myth and ritual. They don't seem to understand that myth is the only means to understand the truth, because everything we say is a myth. Myths, sometimes the truth is too big for our conceptual mind, and we're taking a step towards this non-dual understanding by speaking as myth. The example I've given some time is, let's think you're really hungry, and how do you communicate that to your friend or whoever you needs to know that you're hungry? Do you say that, the pH of my stomach is 7.6 right now? No, you say I'm hungry as a wolf. Well, that's a myth. You're not as hungry as a wolf. And how do you know what a wolf is anyway? So these are mythic statements, but they're actually more true in the sense that they more effectively communicate to that other being than, again, you taking out a pH strip and swallowing it. It's all very, very practical. And yet in the vastness of it, it can set you back. But it's so completely time-tested, different. I mean, the differences in like cultural kind of setting or the cultural attitudes between India and China are vast. And they were both great Buddhist countries, tremendous practitioners they developed, people that we still rely on, the teachings of whom we still rely on. So it's not cultural. It's not cultural. It can be expressed in a cultural way, but the essence of these teachings is completely non-cultural. It's so refined, even in this great practicality, that you can see, like even today, when we take refuge, seeking a refuge from suffering in what? Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, different meanings of that. Buddha, obviously the teacher that lived 2,600 years ago. Buddha can be your own teacher if you can consider him or she that way. Buddha is also your own innate awareness. Nothing there at all, just you. So we can do like that, but we put our hands together in this prayer gesture. And it occurs to me, when you put your hands together like that, you can't be 100% arrogant and hateful. It just doesn't work to be hating someone with your hands together like this. There's something, biological or energetic or I don't know what going on, but they have all this, written in the text. It's really amazing. I mean, they tell you, concentrate 4 fingers below the navel. Why? Because that's where these subtle channels connect and where you can get into the central channel instead of out of the craziness of the 2 side channels. That's a subtle body. No one's ever seen it. You can't cut it open. But they have this kind of sophisticated understanding. So there's wisdom behind these gestures. Take the opposite. If I saw someone wrote some horrible book called Radical Dharma, and of course on the cover they've got a clenched fist because you just have to hate all this stuff that's out there, And I thought, is there anything that's less Buddhist than a clenched fist? But the other thing is when you do a clenched fist, it has an effect on your mind because the body and mind are not separate. We think of them as being separate, but the body influences the mind and the mind influences the body. Actually, the body has been created by the mind, not our thinking mind right now, but our deeper mind. So there's tremendous teachings that have come and practical things. Same thing of taking your shoes off in order to come into the shrine. It has great advantage as far as cleanliness and that, but it also immediately evokes some sort of respectful, even sacred vibe. But it also works in terms of the afflictive emotions. It is something really ridiculous to be really giving it to someone 110% when you're barefoot. I don't know what it is about it. There's something about wearing shoes and boots. And there's a reason those Nazis were wearing big jack boots, They're marching down Berlin in the 30s. Power. So this is all extremely, extremely skillful. We don't see the skillfulness until we practice. And then you kind of look back and you start to see. Another one, to give you an example, when the Vajrayana. Right now, we are what we are. And I'm sitting here, I've got certain responsibilities, as all of us do in one degree or another, for White Lotus. And someone walks in the room right now and has a big pot of gold that they want to give to White Lotus. And of course, that's a wonderful thing, but immediately it triggers all these thoughts for me, right? I'm thinking, we better raise the liability insurance right now. What if the place burns down, that melts, who gets it? What if it gets stolen? All this, what am I going to do with it? We should make it safe, put it in the bank. Maybe Gretchen can go to the bank right now. Is the bank open? This is what happens. This is what gold does in our lives, right? And this is the thing that we all want, let's get gold. But if I visualize a mandala of Buddhas in the sky, and I'm a Buddha myself in this visualization, I'm wearing a gold crown. I don't have any attachment to that gold. So I'm seeing gold in its pure way, without all of my baggage. Or as my Polish friend says, without all of her luggage. But in that, there's tremendous skillfulness. If I sit here and think, I'm not going to think about gold, what am I going to think about? Gold. And everything that's associated there, because of the way that they're called the samskaras in Sanskrit. It's our baggage, the stuff, the associations that we have with different concepts, with different appearances. They're there. We've habituated it for lifetimes. So how do you get out of that? Well, we're dealing with the mind. The mind is the king. So when I visualize myself, I'm working directly with my mind. And the gold there, I'm not attached to it. In its nature, it's free of attachment. There's a subtle attachment, you might say, in creating a form. But this is the great skillfulness of the Vajrayana. You're allowed to use form. It's very hard to go immediately to a formless place. So the skillfulness is great. Similarly, doing the offerings on the offerings, Arghan, Padya, all of those. In Hinduism, those are each individual gods and goddesses. They're offering goddesses for the different things, whether it's food, music, but there's meaning behind all of that. And as you're doing that, you are habituating your mind in what? Generosity, ethics, joyful persistence. It goes on and on. Music, meditation, wisdom. So by doing things, we learn, and we learn in an exponential way. Our rational mind is a tremendous servant, but it's a horrible master. And our world is running around, all these people killing themselves, all these major movements going on throughout the world. They've all justified it in their mind. They're not out there saying, I'm doing the wrong thing. They're saying, I'm doing the right thing. Because there's no standard outside of, their own ideas. So this is the greatness of the Dharma. The Buddha discovered the full realization of his true nature, and he hesitated to teach because he just thought human beings, man, they can goof up anything. And maybe it gets even worse if you have someone who's, appearing to be like some sort of spiritual figure, they can do more damage. So we live in a very slippery slope, so to speak. But these are the reasons for all of these traditions and protections. There's method in the madness. And so you can get to the point where someone like Garchen Rinpoche says, why don't you practice Vajrakalaya? And I'm thinking, I don't have any connection with Vajrakalaya, but I have enough confidence in my relationship there because it's not just ordinary relationship, that you can take that kind of a step. And so then it becomes more open. It's like not whether I have a connection with it or not. I know I have a connection with it because I know I have a connection with this person. And if he's saying do this or she's saying do this, I'll give it a whirl. Because you're still in a situation where you're with someone who loves you more than you love yourself. It's hard to believe. But when that kind of starts happening, the world opens up. You don't have to be afraid to try. You don't have to be afraid to make a mistake because there's wisdom there that will correct, whether through someone like that telling you something or whether your own realization. You start to be able to discriminate, to distinct between what's valid and what isn't valid. And this is tremendous. That's why all these 84,000 teachings, they are tools for all of us. And also, this stuff is so powerful, but in a way that's hidden. We don't see it. Again, it's like the depths of the ocean. We don't see any of that. And yet that is us. If we are experiencing the waves, we're experiencing that with our mind. Those waves are coming out of something that's much deeper and stable and actually blissful in its nature. So when I talk about Gar Rinpoche like that, or Lama Tarchin, you know what? They're here right now. This is not something that, why? When I see the support that we've had, it's just mind-boggling to me because we're not even part of the damn organization. It's not like worldly kind of stuff. Lama Tarchin said once too that, if the students can just maintain samaya, these bonds of trust, and this is not an artificial way. It's like the natural bonds of trust that, you say a little 2-year-old has with her parents. Naturally there, we're wired that way. If we can maintain that bond of trust with a great teacher, the Lama's wisdom mind flows through the entire organization. And it's there to help. These things arise, bodhisattvas spring up out of the earth. We don't see it happening. And we don't even necessarily recognize them as bodhisattvas. But the effect on your mind, you're on the path. You can have confidence. One little story from Tibet, which to me kind of speaks so wonderfully to, this, they said of Guru Rinpoche, for instance. He combined the highest view. His view was higher than a vulture could fly, but that in his actions, they were the finest flower, just right down to earth. So it's the combination of those two things. So this is from a biography written by Sir Charles Bell, who was the British colonial ambassador, really, to Tibet. the previous Dalai Lama, the 13th Dalai Lama, who died in 1936. And he's had a very long relationship with the man and had a wonderful history of Tibet. But nonetheless, he's introducing, because he wrote this in the 1940s, I think, is introducing his readers to Tibetan culture, Tibetan religion, Buddhism itself. But he said the Tibetan religion is wide in its spread. It includes not only human beings, but beasts, fishes, birds, insects, etc. In fact, all living beings. A man in this life may have been an ant in the last, and if he does ill, he may be born a goose or a pig in the next. Your father or sister, who died some years ago, may now be a bird. It is believed that every year the birds hold their parliament at a large lake north of Lhasa, where justice is administered by their king, the cuckoo. The saying runs that the law and justice will prevail among men and women for so long as there is law and justice among birds. Accordingly, the Dalai Lama's duties do not end with his human parliament, for he has come to earth to minister to all living beings, and so he sends a yearly deputation to this parliament of birds. A Lama addresses them on the importance of law and order, and at the same time gives them a present of food. As mentioned above, the human parliament is also fed at the government expense while holding its debates. Most Tibetans are fond of birds. Certainly the Dalai Lama was. Whenever I visited him, there was always a bird or two not far away, perhaps a talking myna bird from India. It makes me very happy, the smallest, finest flower, the smallest kindness. And this is what, I mean, a personal side, but, it is so remarkable with someone like Gar Rinpoche, because, you have all these, especially someone like me, lost in so many ideas, concepts, is just how I get there. So many ideas. You go to see Gar Rinpoche, you think, oh, I have to have some highfalutin question or something like that. And the whole thing, your whole structure collapses when you walk in the door. Because even if you're doing that, the love is so great, and therefore the skillfulness is so great. The Lama can even point out, something like, what's that on your shirt? Complete diversion. Or somehow getting you to thinking about something that is really, really on your mind. The helpfulness is just amazing. I mean, in an institutional way, you certainly feel that. I mean, he gave us that Buddha figure. And again, we're not part of his organization. He has come here for these years, especially because of the transmission of Vajra Kalaya practice for us. He told us we have to learn how to do it without the Tibetans present. Someone beyond, sectarianism, beyond politics. And so when he started to get older, and what kind of happens is that, the organization sort of controls the Lama at a certain point. And so they had a committee of lamas, and they told him that he had to reduce his travel, so he wasn't going to go to Rochester this year. And then he said this some years back, and now he's not traveling anywhere. And so he said, well, okay, I'll go there on my vacation time. So they gave up. It's the great freedom. It's the great freedom. Okay, enough of my hot air. Excuse me. Any questions or thoughts this morning? Then we'll break. We'll do some practice when we come back. Anything from anybody? Okay. We'll ring a bell, of course. Like Thoreau said, we must run at the bell. All right. We'll run a bell when tea break's over. Okay, thanks. Well, I haven't.